Hello and welcome to another episode of History in the Street. I'm your homegirl, your lifestyle expert, and of course your local historian. And we are out here on Mount Vernon. We out here on Mount Vernon, and I'm actually in front of the Martin Luther King Center. I want to clarify a couple of things, and if you notice, right behind me there's a for sale sign. We're going to talk a little bit about that, but before I get started, I want to make sure you guys are here with me. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes while we stand. I'm going to get a little bit out of the rain. We're going to process this story as quick as possible. I'm going to let you guys get on with me. Gaga, thanks for joining me. Hey Tracy, thank you. Appreciate you. How's those donuts going? Donna's Donuts. Y'all don't know much about Donna's Donuts. Y'all gonna know about it from History in the Streets and Columbus Black News. Hey Lisa Timely. Appreciate y'all for joining in. If you guys could hit that share button in the left-hand corner, I'd really appreciate it. For those of you that don't know or didn't hear me in the beginning, I'm standing on Mount Vernon, which would have been called Bronzeville, which was also the business district for Columbus in 1920s. I'm going to take you through a journey of walking through some of the homes and the businesses that currently still exist. We'll talk about some businesses that no longer exist. But first, I thought we would talk about some priority conversation, okay? We're standing in front of Martin Luther King Center because if you didn't notice this week, the social media went haywire over the conversation of the Martin Luther King Center being sold. And whenever there's a conversation regarding our community, I immediately look to identify the truth in the story. Because what begins to happen with social media, so many people have opinions. And then it gets lost in opinions. And then we lose the true facts, okay? So I want to make sure that when we share stories, that I try to identify the facts in the story so that we can walk away successful and no longer listening to rumors, okay? So as I understand this story to be, and let me start with a message that was specifically sent from the King Center on Instagram, and this was their message. And they said, while we exercise our right to exit the lease of the Pythian building in 2019, our offices remain in the Garfield building, which is immediately adjacent to it. We remain in the neighborhood and continue to offer a program of education and cultural opportunities for the people of Columbus, okay? So what that means is this building has many parts inside of it. Some parts of the building was owned by the Masons. That particular part of the base of the building, which was the theater, and as well as a couple of ballrooms, that is the portion of the building that is being sold. So the portion that we normally gather with regarding the Martin Luther King Center and the Arts Complex will still remain. They'll still be in operation. Mamie Moore Park concerts will still continue. keep in mind, we had to take a break this year because of COVID. So that's why you're no longer seeing the concerts. That's why the facilities look a little bit downtrodden, because again, we're in the middle of a pandemic, okay? So let's lessen those rumors and let's listen to the facts. And as I learn more, I'll share more. I'm sure there's more to the story. And as I learn more, as I said before, you guys are gonna learn more, okay? So that's it. No more rumors. Martin Luther King still remains. Martin Luther King still is a part of our community. And if in the interim they do move, guess who's gonna tell you about it? Voila! Your homegirl will let you know. Okay, so we're getting ready to cross the street. Now, since we have been researching some of these facilities, or I should say businesses, some of them aren't here. So this is why we do History in the Streets. I know y'all think it's for my cute little outfits and the excitement of sharing things about our community, but more important, it's so that you can use this as a resource to pay attention, so that when they take it away, you'll know what existed. Because they slowly but surely, in the midnight hour, they're taking it away. In the middle of the hour, they're taking it away, okay? Ooh, I got a surprise for you guys. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about these three particular buildings, and then we're gonna head our way down that way. Mr. Carlton's behind you. Okay. So as you can see here, this is 876 Mount Vernon. And what we have known for this particular establishment is that it was a salon, and as it is today. So we're taking note of what things were, so that you can recognize the history of it and why it is or what it was, and you can understand why we need to preserve it. Let's talk about the building across the street. The building across the street is 875, and that particular place was a beauty salon, Mr. Key's Beauty Salon, in 1978. Does anybody know that? Did anybody go to that barbershop or that hair salon? Say yay! Give me some thumbs up. Give me some thumbs up. And then if we look to the building right to the right of that, that is 873, and it still exists as it did at that time. It was called the Hathaway and Ferguson's. That was established, as it says up there, incorporated, and that's the address. It was incorporated in 1957, and the owners of that facility was Orrin Hathaway, and Ferguson joined him later, and they actually were both white families. And what we got to tell about the history of Mount Vernon is that, of course, it became a business a hub for black organizations, black companies, black businesses. But prior to that, it was a mixed community made up of a lot of Jewish people and Italians. Keep in mind, a lot of other communities were being disadvantaged as well as they moved to America. So those particular communities began working together. They began helping one another. And Hathaway and Ferguson's were one of those people that remained in the community and helped build our community. So I can only assume that many of our relatives may have worked for Hathaway and Ferguson, okay? So I think some of these things are so important as we share our history, because it's so easy to assume that Hathaway and Ferguson were black, just because we're talking about the black business district of Columbus in the 1920s. Now this right here is 870. This actually was owned by a Wilburn Ora in 1926. Then in the 1950s, the Paley family lived here. And then in 1985, the fraternal organization Triumph Temple, which is a Mason, purchased the land. And from my understanding, and I'm not mixing the two, I think those are the individuals that also own a portion of the Martin Luther King Center. So they own that, and it seems like they own a portion on the other side of the Martin Luther King Center as well. So, I have a special guest with me today that I'm so excited for you guys to see. I know you already know him because he's really been prevalent in working in the city. But what I am big on talking about in History in the Streets, as you know, is about legacy. Columbus, Ohio has many Black legacy members that still remain here, that are residents here, that are doing and making a difference based on what it is that they learned from their parents. I have right now in the back of me, Mr. Carlton Weddington. I know you guys may know him. How would they know you?
I used to be the former state representative for the 27th House District, which is now the 25th, and I also served on the Columbus Board of Education.
So, as you can see, he's mighty within his own right, but it didn't start with only him. It really started, I believe, maybe even before your father, but your father is who we're talking about today.
Sure.
So tell us a little bit about why your father is a legend.
Wow. Well,
let's start with his name.
Sure, Dr. Wilburn H. Weddington Sr. My father is considered a legend because of his work in the community as a physician. It has been said that he delivered over 3,000 babies here in the city of Columbus, starting way back when he was an officer in the Air Force at Lockbourne. Many of you know it as Rickenbacker Air Force Base.
So he was a part of the Tuskegee Airmen, or was that after him?
You know,
that was probably after.
I think it was a little prior to him, but at the same time, because many of those same Tuskegee Airmen came through Lockbourne at the time. But my father came to Columbus back in the early 1950s.
Where was he from?
Well, he was from Hiram, Georgia. So that's about 28 miles outside of Atlanta, Georgia. And he started his practice in Marietta, Georgia, was the first Black family practitioner there. And at the time, a majority of the doctors were family practice doctors, which meant they took care of the whole family. So when he actually moved here, and I want to change that time frame, probably the late 60s that he moved here. I was born in 1970. He lived in Eastgate prior to me being born, and then even before Eastgate, he was Franklin Park South.
So those are the addresses, and if you have a memory of those addresses, I'd really like to know them. Not to be nosy, but to make sure that we retain who lived in those particular residents at that particular time, especially when you're talking about a legend.
Right. So, well, prior to me being born, I was born in 1970. So when I was born, we moved out to Sunbury Road. Of course, I remember that address. That's 5800 Sunbury Road. But during that time that my dad was not only practicing here on Mount Vernon Avenue, which is 721 Mount Vernon Avenue, across from Shiloh Baptist Church. And I assume we're going to walk.
Actually, if you guys can walk around to the front, and we will talk as we will walk that way.
Okay.
Because that's the next topic is your dad and Shiloh.
So I can just remember as a small child, after school, coming down here and sitting in my dad's office, sitting in his office, or even sitting out in the patient waiting room, waiting to go home. I remember a lot of times I didn't want to wait, so I'd go outside and play in the neighborhood or try to walk down to wherever the nearest corner store was to get some candy.
So did you think the neighborhood was in a great place at that time, or was it at that point transitioning?
I think a lot of it was in transition still. Like the Urban League obviously was not here. The King Arts Complex was in its beginning phases. you know, a lot of what you see on Mount Vernon and on Long Street was either in its beginning stages or was actually boarded up or turned into something else. Like, for example, where the East Job and Family Services Center is, that used to be Singleton grocery store.
I remember that.
You remember that?
Yeah, Singletary.
Yeah, Singletary.
Yep. I remember that.
And even
For those of you that are talking about opening a black-owned grocery store, we did have one in the 80s, but I do know it's also challenging because of the cost of groceries
right,
to beat the competitors.
right.
So that was why it was challenging to maintain a grocery store in the community.
But even at that time, you had Carl Brown's IGA
You
that
did.
was actually thriving until later years. It really just became a glorified, you know, carry-out, if you will. There wasn't much of the produce left. But, you know, there's a lot of things. For example, even the housing complex that we're going to pass, that wasn't there at all.
Right. Right.
And in fact, the building that my father was in, he was down below, and then up above you had Dr. Preston,
Right.
who was a dentist.
Right. And we talked about
Yeah,
his daughter
yeah.
again, another legend.
Right, Trudy Bartley now, but Trudy Preston.
Yes.
In fact, she said you're more than welcome to give her a call, and she can help you out in that regard.
Well, guess what she's told me?
What?
She told me she was the first African American to graduate from CSG.
She may have been. I mean,
Yeah,
you know.
she did, and I was so excited when she told me. I wrote that down, and then you mentioned her,
Yeah.
and I was like, "Oh, I've got to talk to this
So
lady."
the coincidence is that, so if that being the case, you had Trudy,
Uh-huh.
and then after Trudy you had Kay Bell. Kay Bell, if you know Napoleon Bell,
Yes.
that's Napoleon Bell's sister. Okay, and then of course
Now, Kay Bell, what is significant about her? Not that she's not significant.
she
but-
would have been in the same class or second class after Trudy. They're all about the same age.
So she went to there as
as
well.
well. And then my
Got it.
sister is a couple years after them. So my sister is class of 81. I believe Trudy is late 70s, sometime about the late 70s, and Kay is a class or two behind her. So you've got a lot of history. And of course, Napoleon Kay's father was a well-known professional here in the city of Columbus now. Back then, they moved out to, I believe, Las Vegas, Nevada, and I'm not quite sure if he's still living.
Okay.
However, you know, all the families and all the interconnections that you have, it's just amazing when you kind of look at the history.
Well, one of the things that we try to do on History in the Streets is identify the remaining residents or commercial buildings that still remain. We talk a little bit about it, and sometimes what we're noticing is between the time we research it and identify it, it leaves us, like this building that is around the ribbons right now, around the tape.
Yes.
That was just there a few weeks ago.
Right.
So now we're concerned, like, okay, this is why we have to have these conversations, because just as easy as we think we know, it just, in the midnight hour, they come and take it away from us.
Right. Now,
So,
the building also that has some historic value is the building here that this gentleman went into. This is another Masonic lodge.
okay.
This is the Knights of Pythias.
Okay, these are the Knights of Pythias. So there's two different
Yes.
Masons on
Yes.
this street.
So this is the Knights of Pythias.
Okay, I got that. It
This
was,
is their social club,
okay.
and they have been around for years.
1870.
Yes.
It's a group of black petitioned for admittance to the white Knights of Pythias, and that turned into them joining heaven and creating their own
Yes.
organization, only because what happened was they created, or there were black men that looked very white
Right.
who were passing.
Right.
And they got the charter.
Right.
And then from there on, they tricked them, and then they become the African American organization.
Right.
So sometimes we got to be creative as Black people.
Right.
And we've had a history of it, obviously, right?
Right. So,
Where was actually your dad's building?
so right here at the corner, as we walk further, directly across from the entrance of Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church, it is now at the corner of Mount Vernon and Hamilton.
Okay.
And in fact, that entire lot my dad owned, that corner lot. He owned it all the way to the apartments that you will see just to the south of that area.
And within the building that your dad owned was
So within
two offices.
two offices, so you had two entrances. My father's office was on the first floor, and then there was a side entrance with stairs that went up to Dr. Preston's office, and he was a dentist.
And so what I was going to tell you guys, originally, most of this community, as I said before, was built in the 1920s. A couple of the doctors, Dr. Method, and the dentist, Dr. Trembling, I think is the way you say it. Is that how you say that, babe? Trepid. Actually was in the Alpha Hospital on Long Street. And that was the beginning of this journey of building this business community of Black people. And this is where we segregated and we helped one another. And a lot of the businesses were the ones that helped the community.
Right. And I will tell you that not only did my father have his doctor's office here, and above Dr. Preston, they also had businesses along Long Street as well. Dr. Preston had a nightclub, and my father had a 5 and dime store.
So again, they knew what was needed for the community so that they didn't have to leave the community.
Well, before you had, in the history, many may know, many may not, before they brought 71 through here, there was a connection directly to downtown. And, you know, some say that there was actual a method to the madness. They purposely cut off Black
we saw
communities
the map.
from downtown, because once you did that, it kind of affected everything coming through here, because there used to be a direct path through this neighborhood, even back when they had trolley cars coming through along Long Street. And so when that happened,
'Cause it was almost like our own Wall Street.
yeah, if you will. I mean, you know, it was a thriving community. There were a lot of businesses. Even when you do the research of St. Clair,
Right.
and where many of your jazz artists came, they stayed there at the St. Clair when they went to go perform either at the Lincoln Theater or at what used to be the Macon. And so you had some of your major artists that would come through here. They'd stay here at the St. Clair, they'd go perform at the Lincoln, or they'd perform at the Macon, and they did all of their interaction, restaurants, shopping, right through this area. And so there used to be a really nice display in the King Arts Complex that talked about the history of the King Lincoln Bronzeville neighborhood. And even another gentleman who came from New York, he actually did some history as well. His name is Mr. Brown.
Not familiar with
I
him.
will have to get his information.
Did he go to Ohio State at some point?
No. He just was interested in knowing about the community that he moved into.
Okay.
And so he did some research and found, you know, a number of things about the history of King Lincoln Bronzeville. And so we've got a lot of history here. We've got a lot of people who have families that still live here. And it's important to know, because, I mean, even Shiloh Baptist Church is a historical landmark.
So as he said, Shiloh Baptist Church is historical in its own right. What we do know about them, and if you notice, there's a historical marker there, which is a great thing someone knew its value and someone knew to apply. Do we know that when you know a building or a home has historical value, it's not going to preserve itself? There is a process that you have to go through in order to preserve it. And Shiloh Baptist did that. They have an Ohio historical marker, which means that it's very difficult to destroy, and more than likely it will never be destroyed, considering it's already on the registration list. So that's how we preserve our history. Shiloh Baptist was founded in 1869, the third oldest church in Columbus. They have descendants actually that came from the Second Baptist Church. This building, the actual building, was completed in 1923. And as I said before, it is on the historical landmarks of Columbus. Also, I think a good thing to state, Shiloh Baptist, as we all know, the black community didn't always have access to finances and banking as other communities did. So it took us to take it back into our own hands. Shiloh had created a credit union that currently is still in existence today. They now are in partnership with Ohio Credit Union since 2014. So again, they always tried to find ways to make it easier for the black community that maintains and remains to this very day. Love that type of stuff. I love it, love it, love it. Now, do you remember anything else about over here?
As I said, literally, there's been nothing that's really changed of this particular block. So when you came to my dad's office, the entrance was right here.
So turn around and tell the camera.
This is the entrance right here into my father's office. He had a nice open window here that you could see. You walk up the steps. You'd have the patient's waiting room here. There was another outside door that you walk straight up the steps to Dr. Preston's office. But I mean, literally, this plot of land has not changed. Other than I don't remember that tree. Now, mind you, we're talking about 40 years ago. So 40 years ago, that might have been a little bush.
How long has the building been gone? It can't have been, because
So-
it's online still.
You might
A picture of it.
Is it really? So, but it has not been here in probably about 20 years, if not more.
Wow.
This has
'Cause
been.
was it white
It was a white
and
building.
tall?
A white
Two-story.
two-story building. Yes.
And you went up the side and could go up some steps?
Yes, that was.
That is on, it's online.
Yeah.
I don't know how they got a photo of
So
it then.
the crazy part is, I used to cut the grass from there all the way down, even to that apartment complex when I was old enough to do so. And that's the same apartment complex that's been there. This
Do you
here
know
is-
anybody that lived in there?
I don't. This right here was the
Turn
back of
around
the,
and talk to the camera and walk backwards.
this was the back of the office here. At the little entrance to the 2, 3, 4 car parking lot. He had a ramp that came up here to go in the back door. And at the back door to the right was my dad's office. He had that big grand desk and a swivel chair. I'd like to sit in his desk and swivel in the chair. Once you got past, we're along the corridor of the office. To the left was a patient room. Then just beyond his office to the right was a patient room.
Now, where did Dad go after he left here?
So after he left private practice, he was still on staff at Ohio State because that's where he began as a doctor in the School of Medicine, family practice. He rose up from that department to being the associate dean of the medical school. But not only was he on staff at Ohio State, at the time it was St. Anne's, or St. Anthony's, St. Anthony's,
Okay.
which then went to Park and now is OSU East. He also was at Grant Hospital. So between St. Anthony's, Grant, and Ohio State in his practice, he was busy.
Well, I think what's more important to talk about your dad is he was highly respected.
Right.
To be able to fraternize, even when we're thinking 40 years ago is not that long.
Right.
40 years ago for a black person, it still was unique that they allowed for him to be in the same space, even
Right.
with medically.
Right.
I mean, you had to have a lot of respect.
And quite frankly, you even go beyond that, because if you think this is 2020, so let's go back to 1950 when he made his way up to Lockbourne, and then from Lockbourne to Ohio State and beginning his private practice. He was vested in the community, having lived in Franklin Park South and then Eastgate. He had a business. He was part of the Cavaliers Club. He was one of the first presidents of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated here. You know, all of the socialite opportunities that brung the black elite together, but he still was humble because, as I mentioned early on, my father was one of the first pioneers in terms of medicine in this community, that if it wasn't for Medicaid and Medicare coming on board, he wouldn't know. There may not have been a way to help people in this community, those who were less than, those who did not have the means to actually pay. And even to the point where my dad, he had one of the first motorhomes that he converted into an office, because those who could not make it to the office, he would go to them. He would take the motorhome and have them come outside their house and come onto the motorhome.
And that makes sense, because what began happening by that time, we started moving to the north side and
Right.
to the hilltop
Right.
and different areas
Right.
outside of just this area. So as his practice grew, it
Right.
was important. Again, he was evolving. He was a visionary.
Right.
He was very smart.
Right, right. And
Way a man before his time.
so, you know, and so as myself, my youngest sister Maricia, Kim, Cynthia, and Ricky, as they moved through the family on out on their own, I was able to see, you know, all of this transform into what it became in his twilight years of practice. And then just after no longer practicing, had retired. If you go over here to Long Street now, you see all of the great people who impacted this community, impacted the city. And I'm proud to see my father's picture up there, along the likes of Jerry Hammond, Les Wright, a number of people from this community and from the city who did great things.
I love it. I love it. Okay, well, you guys, you got a lot of information regarding the business district of Bronzeville. Last week we talked about some residents. This week we talked about some businesses. You were not only introduced, you already know Carlton, but now you know the impact and where he comes from. The legacy of Dr. Wilbur Weddington, who actually made an impact in our community at a very unique time. We're standing at the place where his place was in the 50s and 60s. And why we have these conversations is because in 2060, I don't want these buildings to go. So somebody has to make the conversation worthwhile today to preserve our history tomorrow. And that's what this show is all about. I thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you for having me. I mean, this is great. You know, it helps people really understand what their community is all about, and how we can help preserve great institutions such as this, and hopefully
and avoid more stuff like that.
Right.
Because that actually is a lot of pain involved when it pertains to the freeway cutting right into our community. But we're not going to let that happen again. And that's why we do History in the Streets. Now keep in mind, at 6:30 today, in about less than an hour, we're going to be doing Columbus Black News. We're doing a relaunch. So please take a break, get your tea, and join us back at 6:30. This show returns next Sunday at 5 o'clock with History in the Streets. You know I don't do none of this in vain. Everything is to do is to help you grow in history. My name is Rita Fuller-Yates. I'm your homegirl, your lifestyle expert, and now your historian. I'll see you next time.
Columbus has always had a rich African-American history. From the late 1800s to present day, we've always been on the move. It's as if every street has a story to tell. And our very own community historian, Rita Fuller-Yates, is here to tell it.
Go girl, do your thing. Go girl.
That's right, your homegirl's on the scene. She's out here uncovering the facts and sharing the history in the streets. Let's go.